Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Association Peeps and Cubicles Drinking Coffee. I'm John Ricco with Partners in Association Management, and I'm joined here by
Rachel Luoma with Partners in Association Management. Hello, everybody.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. We've had a little bit of a hiatus, a breather from recording some of these. We had some technical issues we were dealing with, and then just getting busy. So
That's
it's good to be
right.
back here and to
I know.
start firing these back up again. So
I love it. And on a new technology platform.
yes,
So
new
it's very
platform and
exciting.
everything. So it's all good
Yes.
stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a particular coffee of the day other than I'm just drinking my regular stuff. And it looks like you're drinking water there. So this is
I am. Hydration is key.
okay, so it's Association Peeps and Cubicles hydrating,
Hydrating, drinking whatever.
hydrating appropriately. Um,
Hydrating appropriately.
like I just have my normal coffee, but the funny thing is I got this kind of bizarre mug, which I found. Well, first off, I found it in the Goodwill. For pro tip for those of you who are do-it-yourselfers, if you need a tool and it's something you're not going to use very much, a lot of times you can find tools at Goodwill. So I'm roaming the aisles at Goodwill, and I'm walking by a shelf and I see this mug which has like a people's wedding on it and a
That's
dog, and
hilarious.
then like a group picture, but then this weird thing of like the wooden figures that they use for art art classes with a little fake alligator, and to just find that at Goodwill, I just thought it was funny and weird, so I bought
I always
it.
hesitate when I go to donate things to Goodwill. Like my kids, they get a class T-shirt every year, and so I'm like,
Hmm.
do I give those T-shirts to Goodwill, or so now I just have a stack of like personalized T-shirts in my closet because I don't know what to do with them. So someone obviously decided they wanted to donate their personal mug. I love
Yeah, so if this is you and you want it back,
it.
well, let me know. I'll be glad to. It was
That's
only
right.
99 cents, so I'll be
Contact
glad to
us
return it.
today.
All right, so we are not here to talk about Goodwill, thrift stores, and coffee mugs. But Rachel, you recently did a blog a little earlier this summer on finance for our blog, Partners Preceptors. And so that focused on financial tips for association executives. And so I wanted to spend a little time talking about that today, to
Sure.
just kind of get your sense of why you thought that was an important topic, and just talk a little bit about some of the things that you touch on in the blog.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, financial management is a very important topic for any association professional, and for a lot of us, when you come into the position of being in an association, whether it's an executive director or a meeting planner or a membership or member services, you know. We all come in with a different level of understanding related to finances. And I was able to parallel a lot of the things that I learned, with my personal finances into kind of learning business finances. But otherwise, when I feel like when you go to these meetings, and we all go to them. I know ASAE is coming up. We go to AMCI as an association management company. We're members of the Florida Society of Association Executives. There aren't a tremendous amount of courses on financial management. A lot of them are on different topics, and even those that are on financial management sometimes can be very expensive to attend. Reading books cover to cover isn't always my cup of tea. If I'm going to read a book, it's usually a YA book. Like, give me Harry Potter any day, but give me the principles of association management, and I may not want to spend my afternoons and evenings reading that. So I just thought that this was an important topic to be able to provide what I call some meat and potatoes information about finances in just an easy to read, quick format that you can have over your coffee in a mug that you found, at Goodwill or whatever you choose to hydrate with. So, it's just an important topic for me.
Very good. One of the things you talk about is the financial statements, and I know as someone, when I was new to the financial aspects of association management, the balance sheet was something that I really tended to skip over, and I just kind of glance at it and then move on, because you want to see the statement of activity and you want to
Yeah,
see how much money came in and what do we spend and where did it go and
absolutely.
all that good stuff. And that came back not to bite me, but you come back a while later and you're like, hey, what is all this outstanding liability that I have here? So
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about the balance sheet and the importance of reviewing that?
Absolutely. So I think the balance sheet is critical, right? It is a snapshot of the association at that given moment. So if I'm looking at my, July financial statement, my balance sheet is a snapshot of the health of the organization as of July 31st. And so it's giving me a lot of critical information. It's not as exciting as my profit and loss statement or my, what I'm looking at, because it's not necessarily telling the same story, but it is telling an important story. So it's giving me information about cash. It's giving me my cash balances in all of my accounts. What does my cash look like? Is my cash going up or down? How does that compare to the previous year? How does that compare to the previous month? And so that's really important information. Are there other assets that the organization has that we need to be paying attention to? I know for the organizations that I work with, I'm looking at accounts receivable. We have magazine revenue that is promised. And because we are accrual accounting, we're tracking that information in our financial statement. So I'm looking at my accounts receivables. How much of the money that I've been promised is outstanding? How old is that debt? Do I have things that have been on that balance sheet for 90 days or greater? What's the likelihood that I'm going to get that? Does any of that need to be written off? So I need to look at those things. So I'm looking at my assets, right? Assets are things the organization has, whether it's cash assets, whether it's, your building, things of that nature, fixed assets, investments. I'm looking at that. How are my investments doing? Nobody wants to answer that question right now. They're not doing great, just in case you haven't looked at your balance sheet in a while. But what action needs to be taken, because you need to know what's happening there. And then the liability side is, how much money have we been paid that's not really ours? And that's how I kind of describe liabilities. If I close the association doors tomorrow, all the money that's sitting in liabilities, I can't stop looking at the dog when you take the picture and take your drink. All that money that has been paid to us isn't technically ours. So maybe you've got a member who's paid their dues forward. Maybe you have a sponsor who's paid for the meeting for next year, and you owe that money back. So it's really important to pay attention to your liabilities. My liabilities also give me a snapshot of future years of revenue, because in theory, hopefully some of that liability will then transition to a revenue. So if I'm deferring my membership dues, if I'm deferring a portion of certification payments, or I'm deferring meeting registrations or sponsorships for my next year, that gives me a snapshot as to what my revenue is going to be next year, which then helps me down the road in budgeting and things of that nature. And then what do my net assets look like? What do my net assets for, year to date look like? How does that compare to previous years? And then what does my overall net assets of the organization look like? And that takes into account, the history of the organization. So for me, the balance sheet is a pretty critical thing that I want to be looking at every single month, and that I need to be able to explain to my volunteers and my volunteer leaders.
Well, Rachel, you mentioned there at the very tail end of that budgeting, and I know that's something that those of us in the association and nonprofit world have to watch very closely and prepare for. And one of the things that, after reading the article, that I did want to ask you about is if you have any thoughts or tips or suggestions. I know many of us have anomalies in terms of our inflows and outflows of cash, especially those who have members that are certification that might need continuing education. So, especially if you've got members that are on a 2-year cycle or a 3-year cycle, you're probably going to have 1 year where you'll have significantly more income based on the fact that you've got all these people out there that need CE. So there's probably more people at the annual convention. There's more people participating in your webinars and other events. Do you have any suggestions for how people can plan for those anomalies that you might have in 1 year, but not the next 2 or 3, and remembering, oh shoot, this year we have to budget for this additional expense, but it's not something that happens on a regular basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know about you, but I kind of create my budgets in Excel. To me, it's just the most user-friendly tool. I can build in formulas, and I've got historical information. So it sounds silly, but I also have a column in my Excel spreadsheet in my budget for kind of notes and running notes. And it's not something that I share externally with boards as I'm necessarily presenting it, but it helps me to capture a lot of different things that may be happening and things that I need to be paying attention to from a budgeting standpoint. So in my notes column, I may include a formula for how I got to the number that I got to. And I have that for every single year. So I can see some of those trends and how I'm creating the formulas for the numbers that I may be getting, especially on the revenue side. I'm also putting notes in there as I think of them each month when I'm looking at my financial statements. So maybe I'm looking at my financial statements and I'm seeing some information that's telling me a story. Maybe I'm seeing that we talked balance sheet, that my liabilities are down for some of my deferred revenue. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, is this a trend or is this a fad, right? Is this something, a fad to me is just something that kind of happens, but it fades away. A trend is like, this is how it's going to continue. And so then I may go in on that notes column and make some notes there that say, keep an eye out on membership dues. These seem to be trending lower in my deferrals this year compared to last year. And so then I know that I have that note as I'm looking at creating budgets for the future, that may be something to look at. And maybe I have to budget for less revenue on the membership side because I didn't defer as much as I have in the past. Same thing there. If like my certification is every 3 years, then I need to make a note to say, 2023, that's, an odd year. And so I should expect X amount of revenue for that. 2024 is an off year, so revenue needs to be lower, and really kind of capturing those notes, especially because if, I always say transitions happen, whether they're for good reasons or bad reasons. I had a friend who used to say, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, you'll know. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, hey, I don't want to get hit by a bus. And then I had another friend who she's like, why don't we just say if I win the lottery? I'm like, that's so much better. But if you win the lottery, and let's say it's an exorbitant amount of money and you're never coming back, you want to pass that institutional knowledge down to somebody else. And so getting the information out of your head and onto paper is one of the best ways that you can really assist yourself in budgeting, because you may not be thinking about it down the road. So really just kind of do a brain dump in that notes column and just keep it there and have it running and continuing to provide you with information. The other thing too is I don't think that budgeting is a solo event. I think that budgeting involves a lot of people, because everybody's bringing a different perspective, and you may have multiple people who handle different things within the association. And so if I'm not talking to my meeting planner when I'm doing a meetings budget, I'm probably missing some critical information that's going to help us to know better and understand better what our revenue and expenses might look like in a given year. So I want to start with that draft budget, and I want to talk to whoever's working with me on membership and say, here's what the trends look like. What are we looking at? What are we thinking next year? Talk to my person who's assisting with meetings. All right, what does our sponsorship look like? What do we have coming down the pipe? What are those numbers? What story are they telling? And really kind of getting more people. Same thing with publications or certification. I think you're catching the drift, right? You're picking up what I'm putting down. But really getting just more perspective and more eyes on that. It also then helps me when I'm going to my budget and finance committee or to my board to really tell the story behind the numbers that we're presenting, as to why we're showing those numbers and what trends we see. And so that really helps me, I think, and hopefully can help others to really nail down some of those budget numbers. I mean, it's never going to be perfect. I always try to err on the side of caution. I budget very conservatively on the revenue. I budget very liberally on the expenses as well, just so there are fewer surprises. But I think, tracking kind of your notes and then getting more people involved are some really great tools for helping it during the budgeting process.
Yeah, that's all good stuff, Rachel. I appreciate that. And just kind of winding up here. I mean, the last thing, you're just kind of thinking about what you had in that article, and just 990s and tax time. And I don't know about you, but that's my dreaded time of the year. I just hate looking through the tax return and working with the accountants on all that stuff. But the thing I find that, and you mentioned in the article, is it's always a good time and it's a good reminder for just some of the policies that you should have in place. And, as part of your 990, it asks about, various things like your conflict of interest policy. And it's a good time to look at those sort of things and make sure they're up to date, and you're, making sure that you're adhering to all the good stuff that's in those. What can you share with us here as we wrap up, just on all the financial policies in that aspect of the finance world?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, if you are in a position where you're looking at the association's 990, the 990 obviously that's the tax form that the associations have to file. You'll hear other things like the 990T if you have to pay, unrelated business income tax, or if you're in Florida and you're paying state taxes, you may have to file your F1120, all these, letters and numbers that you're like, huh? But I think, the biggest thing is, getting a copy of your previous year's 990. That's a good starting point, and figuring out, okay, what is different on this 990 that we're filing this year, or your draft 990 versus last year, and looking at those variances. And that helps a lot. All these questions, yes and no, and, what policies do you have? And, do you have a third party external audit, or do you own property, or, any of those things? So get a copy of that, and start by comparing the two documents. It also sounds silly, but there are instructions that the IRS provides, and so just taking even a quick glance, a cursory glance at those instructions, might help to provide you with a little bit of insight into what the IRS is expecting and how you fill that out. I mean, I know I work with, we work with a third party accounting firm to produce those. But at the end of the day, as the executive director, you are responsible for what you produce as the association. And so you still have to check the numbers, and you still have to look through it. You have to look at, big numbers, look at your net assets, look at your total assets, look at your total liabilities, and making sure that those numbers match your financial statements. And if they don't, ask about it. I mean, it is okay to ask questions. In some respects, it's our job to ask questions. There is no way that I understand everything that is on that 990, but at least I can ask about it, and ask the people who do understand that, ask my CPA, and ask that. And then, looking through the questions, looking through what they're asking about, reading through the supplemental information, reading the mission statement. Is that correct? Reading the board members' names. Are they spelled correctly? Reading any of the schedules, like if you're filling out, a different audit parts, there's schedules, which is like the supporting documentation, and reading that. And then, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you, I Google a lot of stuff, right? I'm looking at and be like, okay, what is this? And what is this? And so I think due diligence is the biggest thing when it comes to the 990, and making sure that you're doing your due diligence to review that before it is presented, if you, present it, or if it's filed. And then, you asked about the different association policies. The 990 does put in there specific policies that your association has. It's asking if you have a conflict of interest policy. It's asking if you have a whistleblower policy. It's asking if you have a document retention policy, a compensation policy, a joint venture policy. These are things that the IRS is telling you you should have. I mean, they're not quite saying it, but it could result in a red flag. So, it's a good reminder to make sure you have those policies in place. If you don't, it may be a good idea to get your board to approve some of those policies. I know that a lot of the associations like FSAE and ASAE and AMCI have document libraries where you can see sample policies, so you don't have to start from scratch. But that's a good place to make sure, and a good time of year to make sure that those policies are there and existence and potentially have been updated.
I can tell you, Rachel, as someone who just got done dropping 2 kids off at college, I can't understand IKEA directions, so there's no way I'm going to understand IRS instructions. So
That's
I
true.
will not be reading the IRS instructions, but I'm sure there's some folks out there who
No worries. As someone who has never been to an IKEA, I can't relate to that, but I have heard it is easy to get lost to. My kids have been to an IKEA, but I have not. So.
All right. Well, listen, I appreciate you spending some time and sharing your insights on the exciting world of finance, Rachel. We appreciate you joining us and participating and watching this episode of Association Peeps in Cubicles. And we hope to see you next time. So
that's right. Hydrate wisely. Bye,
hydrate wisely. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Take care. All right, bye.